I hate April Fool's Day. You see, I've been a journalist for some time now, and over the years I've had both the honor and privilege of getting to write for several different news outlets, some admittedly better than others, but regardless of the outlet, my least favorite publishing day of the year is always April 1st. You see, in today's attention-based digital economy, news outlets, even reputable ones, already make common practice of deeply unethical headlining and feature photo selections meant to evoke an emotional response. Increasingly, headlines are not about informing the reader and are instead about prompting them to take some sort of action, whether it's commenting, liking, sharing, or clicking. And the truth of the matter is, it doesn't matter if you're commenting to say an article is inaccurate or irresponsible. As far as the algorithm is concerned, that means the same as any other comment. Likewise, it doesn't matter if you're clicking on an article out of outrage to see how wrong the author is. That click still pays their bills all the same. So in a world where it's already increasingly difficult to discern fact from reality, I can't stand the idea of devoting a day to misleading the public, especially because a lot of people click on stories not realizing it's April 1st, or click on the stories days, weeks, months, or even years later and not recognizing at all that that was an April Fool's joke to begin with. This pops up in my research from time to time because aviation-focused news outlets will publish April Fool's Day stories about the TR-3B or Aurora, and then months or years later, I'll see those headlines pop up as things people actually believe in comments on Reddit or under my content. But to be clear, I also understand the hustle, and I've even participated in April Fool's tomfoolery in the past. And I'm the first to admit that there's nothing wrong with having a bit of fun, just as long as you're clear in the content that it is not factual. So in order to be the change I want to see in the world, I'm going to focus instead on content that misleads the public the other 364 days a year. Namely, the way warfare is depicted in movies and television. And in the interest of having some fun, I've narrowed it down to how to use air power to engage Kaiju, or giant monsters like Godzilla. Let's say it's in honor of the new Godzilla x Kong movie coming out. Because regardless of movie or monster, there is always a scene in these movies showing tactical aircraft engaging these skyscraper-sized monsters from within arm's reach. So let's talk about what these movies get wrong about aircraft engaging Godzilla-like monsters, and how I do it instead. I'm Alex Hollings, and this is April Fool's Day. As I said before, in just about every big-budget kaiju blockbuster, we get a scene that shows stealth fighters engaging these skyscraper-sized monsters at close range. Now, these are not just the wrong kinds of aircraft for this fight, but they're also armed in the wrong ways. Stealth fighters are designed specifically to delay or prevent detection against high-frequency targeting radar arrays, which is not a technology Godzilla is known to leverage. And as a result, it not only doesn't make sense to use stealth fighters, but it especially doesn't make sense for them to only carry weapons internally. But nonetheless, we usually get a pretty cool shot of these aircraft opening their internal weapons bays to launch missiles, despite launching these weapons at close enough range that Godzilla or King Kong is able to just swat them out of the sky immediately after firing. But as we know in real-life combat operations, commanders don't always have the best aircraft for the job, and sometimes they have to make do with the aircraft that they have available. So for argument's sake, let's say F-22 Raptors really are the only jets on the tarmac that can get airborne and go engage Godzilla. Well, the F-22 is primarily an air superiority-focused fighter, meaning most of the munitions it carries are meant for air-to-air engagements. But the F-22 is capable of carrying two 1,000-pound Mark 83 JDAMs, or Joint Direct Attack Munitions, which are unpowered GPS-guided bombs with a range of about 15 miles. Now that means a single F-22 Raptor could probably shove about 2,000 pounds of ordnance into a single one of Godzilla's nostrils from as far out as 15 miles, which, at Godzilla's height of around 350 feet, is closer than the horizon, but would nonetheless mean that the Raptor would be a tiny little speck way out there, and Godzilla would likely not even be able to see those puny little bombs as they coasted their way in. But let's just say hypothetically that we had a few F-35s on the tarmac as well, and we weren't worried about this giant monster picking up our aircraft on radar. Well, in that case, it would make a lot more sense to engage Godzilla with a weapon like the AGM-158 JASSM or AGM-158B JASSM-ER. JASSM, of course, standing for Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missile. Now, both iterations of this missile can be carried externally by the F-35 and are powered by air-breathing jet engines that give them extended ranges. The JASSM has a range of around 230 miles, and the JASSM-ER, despite having the exact same exterior dimensions, can reach out beyond 575 miles. And in either case, these weapons would deliver a 1,000-pound high-explosive warhead capable of producing a 100-foot complete destruction blast radius. In other words, a blast radius that's nearly 1/3 the height of Godzilla himself. As you might imagine, that would make for a much bigger impact than the puny little fireballs we often see erupting on Godzilla's skin as these fighters try to engage him. And because these weapons can be launched from literally hundreds of miles away, Godzilla would never even see the launching aircraft, let alone stand a chance at swatting them out of the sky. And it's not like either of these fighters would need to get close to target Godzilla. First of all, these munitions are GPS and inertial guided, but even if they weren't, the F-22 Raptor's AN/APG-77V1 active electronically scanned array radar is said to be capable of detecting enemy targets as small as 1 square meter at distances of more than 250 miles. And the F-35's AN/APG-81 radar is just an upgraded version of the Raptors that is even better suited for engaging ground-based targets, including Godzilla. I mean, if these aircraft engaged actual targets the same way they're shown engaging Kaiju, they would be at risk of being taken down by anti-aircraft artillery and man-pads, let alone actual surface-to-air missile systems. But in reality, if Godzilla were laying waste to Los Angeles, the US would not limit its air power response to a handful of stealth fighters. In fact, the monster would be eating a near-continuous lunch of long-range land attack cruise missiles launched by a wide variety of naval assets. But I want to focus on the air power element here. And if I were in charge of the Air Force's Kaiju response team, my team would be made up of F-15E Strike Eagles, B-52 Stratofortresses, and C-130 Hercules. Now, to be clear, there are plenty of aircraft that could do the job, but these 3 platforms have pre-existing global infrastructure, fairly high readiness rates without extreme maintenance demands, and broad capability sets, making them especially well-suited for my anti-kaiju task force. Now, the first stage of our air operation would be all about getting the monster's attention and hopefully drawing it out to sea to engage its attackers, which would come in the form of wave after wave of standoff munition deployed from these 3 types of aircraft, including AGM-86 air-launched cruise missiles deployed from rotary launchers inside B-52s. Now, exactly how quickly a single B-52 can launch these weapons in sequence has not been disclosed, but assuming we used 3 B-52s for the job, it would allow us to launch 3 AGM-86s simultaneously to engage Godzilla from more than 1,000 miles out. Now, each AGM-86 carries a 1,200-pound high-explosive penetrating warhead, allowing us to hit Godzilla right in the back of the head with a combined 3,600 pounds of high-explosive munitions simultaneously, which is sure to get his attention. And once we got his attention, the goal would be to lure him out to sea, particularly to some shallow water where we could continue to engage him from the air. And the best way to lure him would likely be to continue hitting him in the face with wave after wave of these standoff munitions, including the aforementioned AGM-158 and 158B, JASSM and JASSM-ER, deployed by C-130 Hercules. You see, the C-130s would leverage the U.S. Air Force Research Laboratory's Rapid Dragon palletized munition system, which was purpose-built to allow cargo aircraft like the C-130 or C-17 to deploy a large volume of these cruise missiles from standoff ranges. So again, by using just 3 C-130s, each carrying, let's say, 2 Rapid Dragon pellets, we could hit Godzilla with 12 waves of 3 AGM-158 cruise missiles, each carrying a 1,000-pound warhead. So again, hitting them right in the face with 3,000 pounds of high-explosive penetrating power over and over again, 12 times in a row, supported even further by F-15E Strike Eagles deploying AGM-84K SLAM-ER air-launched cruise missiles. Now, the SLAM-ER is, to some extent, just a heavily upgraded Harpoon anti-ship cruise missile, which can be used to engage targets both on land and at sea. Now, this weapon carries only an 800-pound warhead and has a range of only around 180 miles, but they can also be remotely controlled in flight, allowing them to make rapid course corrections in case Godzilla proves to be more elusive than we thought. And again, with just 3 F-15E Strike Eagles, we could slap Godzilla right in the face with 4 volleys of these weapons, each volley including 3 SLAM-ERs with an 800-pound warhead. All told, just these first 9 aircraft could hit Godzilla with some 36 volleys, each including 3 missiles, and a total of between 2,400 and 3,600 pounds of high explosive penetrating force, all coming from the same general direction out at sea. Now, to be honest, this ought to be enough to do in just about any giant lizard, but assuming Godzilla is made of tougher stuff, at the very least, this would get him to go after his attackers. And as soon as Godzilla started to go after these attackers, we would commence Phase 2 of this attack, which would involve another wave of 9 aircraft with the same loadout. But this time, rather than attacking from the same direction to lure him out to sea, they would attack from a variety of different vectors, meant to confuse and disorient Godzilla about where these attacks are coming from. And once Godzilla was a bit disoriented, we would commence Phase 3. Now, to be clear, Phase 2 may require more than one wave of these 9 aircraft, depending on how long Phase 3 takes to enact. Now, Phase 3 would also fly in aboard B-52s and C-130s, but this time carrying very different weapon systems. In particular, the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator and the GBU-43B, Mother of All Bombs. Now, these are both massive gravity bombs designed to engage subterranean targets in very different ways, and the idea would be to use these 2 weapons as a repeated 1-2 punch to take Godzilla down for good. Now, in order to do that, we would need a slew of B-52 Stratofortresses, as well as a fleet of MC-130H Combat Talon IIs to deploy the MOABs. Now, the Combat Talon II is a specially equipped C-130 that can deploy these types of munitions. But if airframe availability becomes an issue, the B-2 Spirit can also stand in to deploy the GBU-57. And it would be the MOP, or Massive Ordnance Penetrator, that would make the first strike in Phase 3. As Godzilla was distracted by the multiple volleys of cruise missiles coming from all around him, a B-52 Stratofortress flying at near its service ceiling for safety reasons of about 50,000 feet, or around 9.5 miles up, would drop a GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator right on Godzilla's head. Now, this weapon was designed in the early 2000s to penetrate more than 200 feet of solid steel-reinforced concrete to take down heavily fortified subterranean structures, meaning this bomb would almost certainly be able to penetrate Godzilla's extremely tough hide. And immediately following that detonation, a GBU-43B MOAB, or Mother of All Bombs, would detonate right behind it. Now, this weapon would come from a lower altitude, only about 33,000 feet, which is where the Combat Talon II tops out, but that's still a good 6.25 miles above Godzilla's head. I couldn't find any good figures for just how far Godzilla's nuclear fire breath could reach, but we never see it cover miles in the movies, so even the MC-130 would likely be fairly safe at that altitude. Now, the MOAB is not a penetrating bomb, it's an airburst munition, and despite being lighter than the MOP at some 21,600 pounds, it remains America's most powerful non-nuclear conventional munition in the entire arsenal. This weapon carries the explosive force of 18,000 pounds of TNT, making it just about comparable in destructive capacity to the M388 tactical nuclear weapon deployed by the Davy Crockett recoilless rifle back in the 1960s. But despite having the destructive capacity of a tactical nuke, the MOAB comes with no radioactive fallout that follows, making it a far better environmental decision for this engagement. Now, the whole idea here would be a 1-2 punch of the MOP's massive explosive penetrating power, followed by the MOAB's massive explosive power, followed by another MOP, followed by another MOAB, until the movie got pretty sad. I never liked the parts of these movies where the kaijus are on death's door. It just always feels like abusing a wild animal. But nonetheless, Los Angeles and the world would be saved. And it could all be done without feeding this kaiju a single stealth fighter. And with that ends this April Fool's Day edition of Air Power from Sandboxx News. I'm Alex Hollings. Now, I may not have a drop this Friday like usual. Those of you who follow me on social media probably already know that tomorrow I'm going in for another surgical consult for my left eye. This isn't something I love to talk about, but I've had a lot of problems with losing my vision in the past few years, and I've even had a few surgeries on my left eye to try to correct it. And tomorrow I'm heading in for another surgical consult to see if another surgery might do the trick. And depending on how that goes, it may not be an invasive procedure at all, and I may have the surgery this week and be back on my feet by the end of it. Or we may schedule a more invasive procedure for a few weeks out, at which point I'll be back at work like normal on Wednesday morning. Now, to be clear, I'm a super fortunate guy, and there are a lot of people out there with way bigger problems to deal with than this. But it has certainly made doing my job quite a bit tougher, and to be honest, just sort of everything a bit tougher in the past few months. And I'm hoping that I come home tomorrow with some good news. But whether I do or don't, I want to express my sincere gratitude to everyone who's reached out with their support over the past few months, because it really does mean the world to me. And that is no April Fool's joke. So whether I see you in a few days or not until next week, thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything.